So in this video, we're going to talk about your abstract painting, and that is the painting that we started right before you left a few weeks ago. So we had started off with a tissue paper collage, and the tissue paper collage was of a photograph that you had found, either you had taken or somebody else had taken. And the purpose of the tissue paper was to make things a little bit more simple so that you could see patterns and you could see color. And that was the part of the process of abstraction. So even though we don't have our tissue paper collages, you still remember doing them, and your brain absolutely remembers you doing them. So you'll still see the impact of those tissue paper collages in your abstract painting. So this is the handout that I gave you to begin with. It says to abstract, to change, allowing for a clearer understanding of an idea. You know that one of the things that we're working on in painting is to try to develop your own voice. And in developing your own voice in art means that you are trying to portray what you see instead of what everyone else sees. So the goal isn't to be realistic. It is to present something that is even more lovely, more personal than being realistic. So you work from a photo. You're going to make sure it's well composed. You're going to choose your colors very carefully, how warm or how cool you want things to be, how intense your colors are going to be, and how light or how dark different things are going to be. And I'll talk about that a little bit too when I show you the one that I did in class and then the one that I'm doing at home. This is what the second part of the paper looks like, and this was done before I was using Google Docs. So you can see that it has a written critique, but it also has work ethic and time use. Well, I can't see how hard you're working, and I can't see how you're using your time. So I'm going to take your written critique, and that will be worth the 20 points that is in this right here. It may look a little bit different in the next week. It'll have the same words on it, but I'm going to try to change it to a Google Doc so that you can write right into it. And I would also like you to attach 2 photos. I do have one of the teachers at Goffstown working on a Google Doc that would be easier for you to put your photos. She hasn't gotten back to me yet, but she was going to try to work on it and see what she could come up with. So it'll look something like this, same words, only if the font may be just a little bit different. Okay, so let's look at our package of materials before we actually start talking about my painting. So we have our paints. I know there's not a ton of them, so you have to be very careful with how much paint you use each and every time you're working with your paints. So much so that last evening when I started mine, I actually made an effort to have them sit so that they were facing upward instead of downwards, because I found that if they were facing downwards and I went to squeeze a little bit out, it squeezed it out too much. So that's how careful I was trying to be with them. I do have other paints at my house, but I want to have the same parameters that you have so I understand what you're going through when you're working with your paints at home. There's also not an orange, so you know you can mix a red and a yellow together to make an orange. I also found that the colors were a little bit bright, so just remember your color wheel. If you want to tone a color down, if you want to make it not so bright, yes, you can add black to it, you can add brown to it, but you can also add the opposite color. So for example, if I wanted to make this a little bit less bright, a little bit more natural, then I would add one of the reds to it. So it is the opposite color on the color wheel that we use to tone things down. So they're a little bit runny, they're a little bit intense, but they're totally workable. The paintbrushes I found were a decent quality, so these are the 3 that I've worked with so far. There's plenty more in the packet as well. Just make sure that you wash them out each time. Don't leave them in your cup of water, or they'll start to bend on the bottom and they won't be as usable as they are right now. It came with a little palette. To me, this is better for a watercolor than it is for acrylics. So usually I just use a waxy paper plate, and I use it a couple of times before I toss it out. So that's what I use for the palette. I did think the knives were really nice. I thought it was interesting that they were so big and yet the paints were so small. But these are definitely decent quality palette knives to mix your colors with. The canvases, so we get 2 types of canvases. We get a smaller one and we get a larger one. And I would say kind of judge as to how much paint you're going to put onto your canvases. So if you know you're going to correct it, and you're going to have many layers, then I would do all the projects on the smaller ones. And if you're optimistic, or if you have more paints at home, you can start off with the larger one. So I did start off with the larger one. You can see the difference right here. And just like we did in class, I started off with the opposite color in the background. So since so much of my painting was going to be greens, I took the red, I watered it down a lot though, because I didn't want to use up all my red, and just put a wash, almost like a watercolor wash, onto the canvas before I started. And then this is what I did probably in about an hour yesterday after I got the paints. And I would say that one of the things that I noticed is the colors are a lot more vibrant, but I also think that I was looking for more vibrance in the painting as I was working this time. I was having a tendency to concentrate a little bit more on the flowers, and on this one, which I had started in class, I was concentrating on more of the yellows and the greens and not so much of the flowers. So maybe I just wanted a little bit more optimism to kind of start off. And remember I told you could add things, so I definitely wanted to add some clouds into my picture as well. And this is the nice little easel. I thought this was kind of cool too. I did put it by the window, an open window, for a little while because I thought it smelled a little bit like chemicals. But I find it's really easy to work with as far as when you're painting, and then you don't get the glare from the lighting in your room. So we're going to start just the same way as we started in class. You would have your photograph. So I have my photograph. I do have my picture of mine, which you may have a picture from where you started, or you may have a picture of your tissue paper. And if you want to use that, that's fine. And then the first thing I did was I went over the whole thing with my wider brush. This one right here. I just watered down my color, and I put the opposite color in the background. And then I took a pencil and I lightly sketched out my different pieces of positive space. And then once I sketched out my pieces of positive space, I went back in and I started to add what is called local color. So the local color is basically the blue, basically a light blue or a white. This is going to be kind of a purpley color back here, but because of the red, it would take a couple coats to kind of get that. I got my lights and my darks on my building. I put in a little bit of greens for the foliage that is around the building, and then I started working with the different types of greens, the different types of yellows, and the different types of oranges that I see in the foreground. So what I'll do is you paint everything once, and then after you have everything mapped out, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to have another session where I paint my sky. Then I go to here, then I go to here, and then the next time I come back, I'm going to do the same thing again. So I call those sweeps, where you paint, layer paint on everything, and then you come back and you paint a layer on everything, and you come back and you paint a layer on everything. I think it's very similar to taking a pair of binoculars and putting it up to your eyes. Everything is blurry when you do that, and then you turn the dial just a little bit. It gets a little bit clearer. That's your first sweep, a little bit clearer, a little bit clearer, and a little bit clearer. If you decide for 2 days you're just going to work on the building, and then you come back and for 2 days you're going to work on this part, and then 2 days after that you're going to work on this part, and then the last part you're going to work on your sky, it may kind of look like another person did your sky, and another person did your building, and another person did this part. All right, so it's kind of nice if you can work all the areas each time you sit down so that it's unified in the end. Okay, so as I do this, I'll either post pictures of what it looks like after the second sweep goes through, or I'll have my lovely husband cameraman here help me do another video where I show you what it looks like after the second and third sweep and fourth sweep and fifth sweep goes along. Okay, so I hope you have fun. We're doing the best that we can. We're grading fairly easily. You want to be relaxed. You want to use this as kind of an outlet also for any stress you may or may not be feeling. So just do the best that you can. That's all we can ask, is that you do the best that you can. Okay, thanks.